I, 30 female, have an identical twin sister, and for the purpose of anonymity, I'll call her Jess. Jess and I look so much alike it can be freaky. At one point when we were still infants, they had to draw a little dot on the bottom of one of our feet just so they could keep track of who was who for medical reasons. My mom adored the fact that Jess and I were cute baby twin girls and treated us as precious dolls who she would frequently dress alike and always make us do things together. At first, I didn't mind it at all because it was my normal and I do genuinely love my sister, but when we started getting older, I developed my own interest. I would get so frustrated or upset when I either couldn't do something because Jess didn't want to, or the only other way I could do it is if Jess could come with me and vice versa. It sucked because despite our appearances, Jess was the more extroverted twin who liked to go to parties and do sports, while I was introverted and artistic. I was always made to do what Jess wanted to do because me not wanting to be social was seen as bad, and the only way that Jess would agree or endure my hobbies was if I did her homework or chores. When my parents were divorcing, I was over the moon when my dad agreed to let me live with him in another state, and Jess didn't want to move away from all of her friends. My mom cried when I had to tell her I didn't want to live with her and Jess accused me of hating them. This really wrecked me emotionally, and I almost caved, but my dad got me into therapy who helped me gather the courage to just leave. I never really did shake off the guilt until around senior year of high school, but I never once regretted my choice because of how liberating I felt by getting to just be me. I was slowly able to repair my relationship with my mom and Jess, but Jess and I were never as close as we used to be, and I was honestly fine with that. Fast forward to adulthood and Jess is engaged to her boyfriend Steve, 36 male, and their wedding is set for this spring. Unfortunately, Jess was recently in a bad accident and her face is going to need to get cosmetic surgery. She has been crying on and off for days over this because there's no way she'll be healed up in time for the wedding. My mom, Steve, and I have been trying to console her, but it's not enough. Earlier this week, my mom approached me with the idea of dressing up as Jess and pretending to be her for the ceremony and reception so the pictures will look nice. I was floored and gave a hesitant no because while I do know that this would mean a lot to my sister, I just really felt uncomfortable about it. My mom was upset with me and said that it wasn't a big deal, it was just for the pictures, and asked me if I really wanted to make it so that Jess would have to be reminded of her trauma whenever she had to look at her wedding photos or just not have any photos at all. So, am I the asshole? She has an update to some questions people had. Jess and Steve's wedding is booked at their dream venue, and if they postpone it, which is in about 3 weeks, they won't be able to book again until around 2025. And families on both sides are coming from out of state. Apparently, between the wedding costs and needing to save up for cosmetic surgery, Steve and Jess don't have the money to pay for professional Photoshop. We live in America, and as far as I know, since Jess's surgery is purely for cosmetic purposes, health insurance may not cover it, if any at all. My mom was the only one who actually approached me about this, so I don't know for sure if Jess and Steve know about this idea. And I'm honestly a little scared of actually talking to them about this in case they're on board and start to pressure me into agreeing.
My wife asked me to choose between my mom and her, and I think I'm going to divorce her. A little background. My mom and dad were both orphans. My dad died 2 weeks before I was born. My mom didn't really have a support system, so we were just the two of us. I never lacked for anything because my mother worked all of her life to give me the life that I have today and didn't have time for herself to start a new life again. She did all the little jobs possible so that we didn't miss anything. She deprived herself of food to give me food. I had very good clothes while she had none. I saw her make sacrifices again and again, and always with a smile. Frankly, I always thought that she was an angel dressed in a human body. The only time she yelled at me was when I was 16 when I saw her getting sick and working at the same time. But she was angry and told me it was not my job to take care of her and it was up to her to take care of me. She wanted me to get really good grades and get into the best universities. It's the only way I can protect myself when she can't anymore. Even at university, she didn't want me to work. I had to be focused on my studies. But she wanted me to volunteer so that I could be an adult who could do something with his hands. My wife and I met there while we both volunteered. My wife is a good person, but she was never close to her parents or her siblings. Yet she adored my mother since she met her. There were times when I thought that she loved my mother more than she loved me, and we laughed about it. Deep down, I think she was looking for the bond between mother and daughter that she did not have from her mother. When I finished my studies, I found a job, we moved in together, but she wasn't comfortable that I called my mom every day. Remind you, those are 10 to 15 minute calls. But eventually she stopped bringing it up. 2 years later, I bought a house for my mom. Because we never had a house in our name. We lived from apartment to apartment. So for all the sacrifices she made, it was for me the least of it, and it was non-negotiable. That's when the problem started with my wife, then girlfriend. She wanted me to think about us first. I told her that my dream had always been to buy my mom a house since I was little, and that's what I had to do. But she complained about it to my mom. My mom didn't even know that I bought a house for her, as it was supposed to be a surprise for her birthday. She was uncomfortable of receiving the house because of my wife, and told me that it wasn't necessary that we could use it for us when we get married. I was furious. I told my mother that the house was for her and she could do with it whatever she wanted, but it was time for her to think about herself first. Our relationship survived that. We got married and then we had our own house. Our life was going well until 2 months ago when my mother fell ill. I wanted her to come and live with us so that I could take care of her, but my wife didn't want to. I then decided to rent an apartment with my own money right next to our house so that I could be closer and go there to take care of her. But even that idea didn't sit well with my wife. Me and my wife don't have children yet. We both work. I usually come home at 6 p.m. But since my mother is sick, I go to see her and then come home around 8 p.m. On weekends, I see her for about 1 or 2 hours, and then the rest of the time I spend with my wife. We go on dates, and I always accompany her in her hobbies even though she never went to mine. 2 days ago, she told me that she thought about it, and she thinks that I prioritize my mom way too much. She told me that I had to choose between my mother and the life that I want to build with her. The truth is that I never made her feel that way. We both work, but I'm the one who cooks, and I pay a person to do the housework. I make sure I make the dishes that she likes. She didn't even know what I like to eat because I never complain. I run her baths, give her massages, flowers, write her poems that I hide somewhere in the house for her to find out. We go on a trip 1 week in a month. I earn much more money than her. I told her to keep her money for herself, and I take care of all the bills, even hers. I always make sure to listen to her and consider her opinion. And I think that I'm easygoing because I can change my mind to accommodate hers. But I realize that she tries completely to dominate me, and the only subject where I don't give her a choice is my relationship with my mother. Am I in the wrong for emailing my fiance's dad about her DNA results? I, 35 male, secretly emailed my fiance's 31 female biological father, who is adopted and has no links to his real family, to inform him that his family had been found through her 23andMe test results. 3 years ago, she bought 23andMe tests for us, her parents, mom and stepdad, and my parents. This was a deeply meaningful gift because my 5 older brothers have tormented me all my life with claims that I was adopted or that our dad wasn't my dad since I don't look like anyone else in the family. I'm tall with red hair, so it really healed an old wound to get definitive proof that our parents are both my parents. What we weren't expecting was for the results of her biological father's family to show up. She wasn't expecting to find many familial connections because she's first-generation American. Initially, there was a third cousin connection on her paternal side, and over the last couple of years, it's grown into a practical family tree. I knew that she had stopped speaking to her dad over 10 years ago because the most he did for her was sporadically remember to call her on her birthday. She explained her reasons for not wanting to give him the information, but that honestly didn't sit well with me. I tracked down her dad's email address in her contacts list and sent him a list of his known relatives. I completely forgot about it until her mom saw a social media post about him finding his family and told my fiance. She was very emotional as she told me about the phone call with her mom, but said she was happy for him. She made a comment about how we didn't have anything to do with it, so I confessed to what I had done. She was furious, and this has created a major issue in our relationship. Am I in the wrong for sending her dad, who's adopted, her test results that identified his biological family?
Today's secret comes from Naomi. I have a secret I have really been battling with. To tell you this story though, I need to go back a bit. I never grew up around much money. My parents struggled to hold down jobs, so they worked eclectically and casually. I always remember feeling stressed about money when I was younger. Even when I was tiny, I could feel the anxiety in our home about when the next paycheck would drop. I also grew up really close to my godfather. Let's call him Lex. Lex was like a third parent of mine. You know how they say it takes a village to raise a child? Well, he was a core part of that village. He was an old friend of my parents and didn't really have any kids of his own. I say really because he did have one kid, but they were estranged because Lex's ex-partner left him and moved away when their baby was young. So it was just me.
My prediction is that this other kid comes back into the fold somehow.
Oh, clever. Okay.
Am I right, Eilish? Actually, don't tell me. Keep
We're about
reading.
to find out in literally 2 minutes.
I'm so impatient.
Lex and I were really close. He taught me how to drive. He'd take me on weekends away if my parents were working, and he literally fed me on nights when he knew there wasn't much food in our pantry. When I turned 20, it became clear that Lex was really unwell. I was devastated. Over the next 8 years, I cared for him like I would a parent. For stretches of time, I moved into his house to look after him. I drove him to appointments and liaised with his doctors. Of course, my parents helped too, but if I'm honest, I believe in my 20s, I became Lex's primary caregiver. It was an open conversation throughout the 8 years of Lex's declining health that I would be the sole beneficiary of Lex's estate. He wasn't what you'd call wealthy, but he did own a modest apartment that didn't have a mortgage.
I come from Sydney. Owning an apartment without a mortgage is like being a millionaire. That ain't modest anymore.
I never cared for Lex because I knew his money would one day be mine. However, I'd be lying if I said I didn't think about my future with this money on my mind. I knew that one day I'd be able to buy a house or a car or look after my parents financially with Lex's nest egg to fall back on. I don't think many people could not let that knowledge change how they approach and consider their future. Last year, Lex passed away. Though it wasn't a shock, I really struggled with his death. The grief felt overwhelming. When it came time for Lex's executor to contact the beneficiaries, it became clear that I was left off the will entirely. I was in shock. I was prepared to come into quite a bit of money upon his death and had planned for that. Suddenly, this was no longer my reality. I hope this doesn't sound awful, but this has compounded my grief even more. Not only am I now grieving Lex, but I am also grieving the life I was promised after he died. Am I a horrible person?
Oh gosh. First thoughts, no. My first thought is maybe an unfair one because I don't want to speak ill of the dead. But what are you doing, Lex? You can't promise someone over the course of what? 8 years that you will get his entire estate and then just not do it in the end? That seems super dodgy, but also like...
Am I wrong for standing up during a Beyonce concert? So I'm a huge Beyonce fan and have been my whole life, especially being a Houston, Texas native. This was my first time being able to afford a ticket, and I'm currently living back and forth between Sweden and the States. Now, I'd never been to a concert in Sweden, but I was shocked by how unlively the crowd was. There was no dancing or singing from anyone in my section, but I was out of my seat singing and having a blast as soon as the show started. That's when a woman behind me, as well as her partner, asked me to sit down so they could see. I assumed since she was starting the show with ballads, I was doing too much and apologized and sat. But once the energy picked up, I was on my feet dancing.